Beneath the floorboards of a quiet Chicago home, police found a nightmare. 26 bodies buried in the crawl space, 3 more hidden elsewhere, and 4 dumped into a river. In total, 33 young men and boys, all victims of one man. His name was John Wayne Gacy. To his neighbors, he was the cheerful contractor next door.
I characterized him as, I thought he was a pretty fine person.
A volunteer who threw block parties, even dressing up as a clown to entertain sick children. To politicians, he was a loyal supporter, photographed shaking hands with the powerful. But behind the painted smile and community respect, Gacy was hiding a secret life more horrifying than anyone imagined. How did this man, who seemed so ordinary, become one of America's most prolific serial killers? To understand the monster, we have to go back to the beginning. John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. He was the second child and only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. On the surface, his family seemed traditional: a working-class father, a homemaker mother, and 3 children.
John Gacy was a son of a blue-collar worker, a mother who was a pharmacist.
But behind closed doors, the Gacy household was anything but stable. His father, John Sr., was an alcoholic with a violent temper. He worked as an auto repair machinist and took pride in toughness. To him, his son never measured up. He would call young John names like sissy, mama's boy, and constantly belittle him for not being manly enough.
Bill's relationship with my grandfather was tough. He wanted him to be a man's man, and my uncle just didn't measure up. He wasn't ever going to be the hunting and fishing kind of guy.
His father frequently told him that he was a failure, he wouldn't amount to anything. So again, you think of how someone growing up with that kind of verbal abuse and emotional abuse would develop as an adult.
Gacy's mother, Marion, by contrast, was protective and doting. She tried to shield her son from his father's abuse, but this only deepened the resentment. Gacy grew up torn between 2 worlds, his father's cruelty and his mother's comfort. As a boy, Gacy wasn't particularly athletic. He struggled with coordination and avoided rough play. Instead, he preferred helping around the house or spending time with his sisters and mother. By the age of 11, Gacy had suffered a significant health setback. He was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition, a condition that caused him to faint unexpectedly and limited his physical activity. Doctors advised against strenuous sports or hard labor. At one point, he was struck on the head by a swing, an injury that caused him to suffer blackouts well into adolescence. Despite the home environment, Gacy was not a complete outcast. He had friends, participated in Boy Scouts, and took small jobs as a teenager. But he lived with a secret: his attraction to other boys. At a time when homosexuality was harshly stigmatized, this realization brought feelings of shame and confusion. In high school, Gacy struggled academically. His grades were average at best, and his frequent fainting spells set him apart from classmates.
I mean, he was ADHD, he had real problems concentrating.
At 18, desperate to escape his father's control, Gacy left home. He briefly attended business school and found odd jobs, but his relationship with his father remained strained. The old man dismissed his accomplishments, even mocking him when Gacy bought his first car. When the car broke down, his father withheld repairs until Gacy agreed to his terms, deepening the resentment. Still, the young man held on to hope that someday he would prove his worth. By the early 1960s, John Wayne Gacy seemed to be on the path to success. He had completed business school, secured work as a shoe salesman, and presented himself as ambitious and hardworking. He had also begun cultivating the skill that would define his public life, the ability to charm. Customers liked him, colleagues respected him, and Gacy quickly earned a promotion. In 1964, Gacy married his first wife, Marilyn Myers. She was the daughter of a wealthy businessman who owned a chain of Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. Through this marriage, Gacy gained something he had craved all his life: status. His father-in-law offered him a management position at one of the restaurants, a lucrative and stable opportunity. For Gacy, it was more than just a job. It was a chance to reinvent himself as a respectable family man. The couple moved to Waterloo, where Gacy threw himself into the role of local businessman. He joined the Jaycees, a civic organization for young men, and quickly rose through its ranks. Fellow members described him as energetic, enthusiastic, always eager to volunteer. He hosted events, recruited new members, and made himself known in the community. Gacy's involvement with the Jaycees was not limited to civic projects. The Waterloo chapter had a reputation for rowdy behavior, including wife-swapping, pornography, and heavy drinking. Gacy participated eagerly, cultivating an image of a fun-loving, adventurous man. At the same time, he used his position in the community to exploit young men. Gacy's pattern was emerging. He would offer teenage boys alcohol, show them pornography, or promise them money for sexual acts. To the boys, he was the successful local businessman, someone to be admired. To Gacy, they were objects to control, to manipulate, to dominate. The respect he couldn't earn from his father, he now sought to force from others. By 1967, whispers about Gacy's behavior began to circulate. Some parents grew uneasy about how much time he spent with teenage boys. But Gacy's charm and social standing shielded him. Few wanted to believe that the cheerful man who organized charity events could be dangerous. That illusion collapsed in 1968. In March of that year, a 15-year-old boy named Donald Voorhees came forward with a shocking accusation. Voorhees was the son of a fellow Jaycee member. He alleged that Gacy had lured him to his home, showed him pornographic films, and coerced him into performing sexual acts. Voorhees' father immediately reported the incident to police. Soon, other boys came forward with similar stories, describing how Gacy had groomed and abused them. Gacy was arrested and charged with sodomy and attempting to coerce a minor into sexual acts. In his community, the news spread like wildfire. The respected businessman, the family man, the Jaycee leader, now accused of crimes against children. Gacy, true to form, denied everything. He insisted the accusations were lies, motivated by political enemies within the Jaycees who wanted to ruin him. But the evidence was damning, and the testimonies of the boys were consistent.
In December 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to a single count of sodomy involving Donald Voorhees. His strategy was to minimize the damage, to present himself as remorseful and cooperative. He told the court he was bisexual, that he had experimented, but that he was not a danger to the community. The judge was not persuaded. Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. For Gacy, the sentence was devastating. His wife immediately filed for divorce, won sole custody of their children, and severed all ties. Gacy's father, the man whose approval he had chased for so long, died while Gacy was incarcerated. The news crushed him. He wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. Later, he would describe this as one of the lowest points of his life.
When his father died, that was difficult because what it means is that you can never repair this relationship.
In prison, the man who had always tried to control his image now had no mask to wear.
But prison did not break John Wayne Gacy. In fact, it became another stage for him to perform. Within months, he had ingratiated himself with staff and fellow inmates. He became head cook in the prison kitchen, earning praise for his efficiency. He volunteered for projects, organized activities, and even secured approval to run a chapter of the JCs behind bars. Guards saw him as a model prisoner, respectful and cooperative. Other inmates described him as someone who could get things done. This transformation wasn't about genuine reform. It was about survival and manipulation. Gacy had learned that he could win people over by playing the role they wanted him to play. And in prison, that role was the rehabilitated inmate. In just 18 months, Gacy convinced the parole board that he was ready to return to society. They granted him an early release in June 1970 after serving only a fraction of his sentence. He walked out of prison a free man at just 28 years old. Upon his release, Gacy returned to Chicago to live with his mother. He told friends and family that he was starting fresh, that prison had changed him. He even became engaged again within months. Within months of his release, he lured another teenage boy to his home. This time, the victim was sexually assaulted, but managed to escape. The boy reported the incident to police, but the case was dismissed when the victim failed to appear in court. Gacy walked away without consequences. Gacy wasted no time reinventing himself. He became engaged again, though that relationship would end before marriage. More importantly, he began building a career in construction. By 1971, he had founded a business called PDM Contractors, short for painting, decorating, and maintenance. It started small, odd jobs, remodeling projects, but quickly grew. Gacy worked tirelessly bidding on contracts, hiring young men as laborers, and presenting himself as a reliable entrepreneur. Through PDM, Gacy gained not just financial independence, but also access. He hired mostly teenage boys and young men, often those who needed money, were inexperienced, or lacked strong family support. To them, Gacy seemed like a mentor, someone offering opportunity. In truth, he was carefully selecting victims. At the same time, Gacy immersed himself in politics. He joined the local Democratic Party and became a precinct captain in his neighborhood of Norwood Park, a suburban area just outside Chicago. He organized events, rallied voters, and gained recognition. Photographs from the era show him shaking hands with prominent politicians, including First Lady Rosalind Carter. To neighbors, he was the cheerful civic leader always ready to help. He hosted elaborate summer parties at his house, inviting dozens of people, sometimes over 400 guests, complete with food, entertainment, and music. At these gatherings, Gacy was in his element. He was the smiling host, the generous neighbor, the man who seemed to have put his troubled past behind him. Few knew or cared that he was a convicted felon. In their eyes, he was a success story. And then there was Pogo. Gacy joined a group of amateur clowns who performed at hospitals, fundraisers, and children's parties. He created two personas, Pogo the Clown, cheerful and silly, and Patches the Clown, more serious and reserved. He designed his own costumes and makeup, often painting exaggerated shapes that gave his clown face an unsettling sharpness.
Behind this cheerful exterior, however, Gacy was spiraling deeper into darkness. By 1972, just 2 years after his release from prison, he committed his first known murder. His victim was Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old boy Gacy met at a bus terminal. Gacy invited McCoy home, promising him food and a place to stay. The next morning, according to Gacy's later confession, McCoy entered his bedroom holding a kitchen knife, perhaps intending to help prepare breakfast. Gacy claimed he misinterpreted the gesture as a threat and reacted by stabbing the boy repeatedly. After the killing, Gacy buried McCoy in the crawl space beneath his house. Later, he said the murder gave him a sense of power, a rush unlike anything he had felt before. It was the moment when fantasy became reality, and once he crossed that line, there was no turning back. Over the next several years, Gacy would refine his methods. He developed what he called his handcuff trick. He would invite a boy to his home, offer alcohol or drugs, and then suggest they play a game. He would show them a pair of handcuffs, demonstrate how he could slip them on and off with ease, and challenge them to try. Once the boy was restrained, Gacy revealed his secret. He had the key, and they did not. From there, the assault and murder would follow. He even devised a chilling variation he called the rope trick. He would loop a rope around his victim's neck, inserting a wooden stick to twist the cord tighter and tighter until the boy suffocated. Later, Gacy would describe this process with a disturbing detachment, as if it were a magic trick rather than torture and murder. As the years passed, the number of victims grew. Some he lured with promises of jobs at his contracting company. Others he picked up from bus stations, streets, or outside convenience stores. Many were runaways, boys whose disappearances attracted little attention. One by one, Gacy brought them into his home, assaulted them, murdered them, and hid their bodies in the crawl space beneath his house. At first, he buried each victim carefully, marking the positions in his memory. But as the numbers increased, the crawl space became crowded. Gacy began running out of room. By the late 1970s, he admitted that the stench in the house had become overwhelming. Still, he continued. When the crawl space filled, he disposed of bodies in the nearby Des Plaines River. Neighbors occasionally complained about foul odors around Gacy's property. He dismissed it as plumbing problems or dead rodents. By the late 1970s, one disappearance would prove different from all the rest, and for John Wayne Gacy, the mask was about to slip. By the late 1970s, the quiet Chicago suburb of Norwood Park had a deadly secret festering beneath one of its homes. John Wayne Gacy's crawl space was filling with bodies, more than 24 young men buried just a few feet below where he entertained guests. The smell of decay lingered in the air, brushed off as plumbing issues or dead animals. For years, no one suspected a thing, but all it would take was one boy, one disappearance that refused to be ignored, to unravel Gacy's carefully crafted mask. That boy's name was Robert Piest. On the evening of December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest was working at a pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, just a short drive from Gacy's home. Piest was a bright, kind teenager with dreams of becoming an architect. That night, he was supposed to celebrate his mother's birthday after his shift. But then opportunity seemed to knock. Gacy had stopped by the pharmacy to discuss a potential remodeling job with the owner. While there, he mentioned to young employees that he paid good money for teenage boys willing to work construction, sometimes $5 an hour, well above the minimum wage. Robert Piest, eager to earn extra cash, told a coworker he was going to meet the man about the job. He stepped outside to speak with Gacy, and then he vanished. When Robert failed to return, his family grew alarmed. His mother, waiting at home with a birthday cake, called the police. Unlike many of Gacy's earlier victims, boys who were runaways or estranged from their families, Robert was deeply rooted in his community. His sudden disappearance immediately raised red flags. The Des Plaines Police Department, led by Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak, took the case seriously from the start. The last person seen with Robert was John Wayne Gacy. To the officers, it was a simple lead: find the contractor who had offered Robert a job. When questioned, Gacy denied ever meeting the boy. He insisted he had stopped by the pharmacy only to discuss business and had no idea what happened to Robert. At first glance, Gacy seemed calm, cooperative, even friendly, but something about his demeanor raised suspicion. Kozenczak wasn't convinced.
As pressure mounted, Gacy's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He confided to acquaintances that he was under surveillance, that the police were out to get him. He drank whiskey in the mornings, sometimes showing up to work slurring and unsteady. He even showed the officers trailing him a bag of marijuana, taunting them because he knew they couldn't arrest him without a proper warrant. Behind the scenes, though, investigators were closing in. On December 19, 1978, they obtained a second search warrant, this time more expansive. And what they found would confirm their worst fears. Back inside the house on Summerdale Avenue, police searched more thoroughly. In a crawlspace access area, an officer noted a foul odor, the kind of smell no plumbing issue could explain. Though the search was still limited, the discovery was enough. Investigators suspected they were standing above a graveyard. Simultaneously, they seized Gacy's vehicles. In one of them, they found a small piece of evidence that sealed his fate: a receipt from the pharmacy where Robert Piest worked, dated the very night he disappeared. That single slip of paper placed Piest directly in Gacy's car. Now the case against Gacy was undeniable. Police had motive, opportunity, and damning evidence. They just needed a confession. On December 20th, 1978, after days of surveillance, Gacy invited his lawyers to a meeting. He arrived disheveled, reeking of alcohol and visibly shaken. Pouring whiskey down his throat, he began rambling about his life, his crimes, and the mounting pressure. His lawyers, stunned, listened as Gacy admitted to killing maybe 30 people. By the next morning, investigators were back at his home, this time prepared for the worst. When officers descended into the crawlspace, their suspicions were confirmed. The soil was disturbed, the stench overwhelming. As they dug, they uncovered human remains. Bone by bone, body by body, the horrifying truth emerged. The crawlspace beneath John Wayne Gacy's home was a tomb. In the span of days, John Wayne Gacy went from a respected businessman under surveillance to the most notorious suspect in Illinois history. The disappearance of one boy, Robert Piest, had finally cracked open a secret buried for years. What lay beneath Gacy's house was beyond comprehension. A mass grave that would stun the nation and forever change the way America viewed the man known as the Killer Clown.
As investigators dug into the compacted earth of the crawl space, their shovels struck something unthinkable: human remains. The smell of decomposition, unmistakable and suffocating, filled the confined space. An officer pushed back dirt to reveal the outline of a human body, then another. What they had stumbled upon was only the beginning. Police halted the search and called in evidence technicians, forensic experts, and medical examiners. Slowly, carefully, the crawl space began to give up its secrets. Word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered outside, horrified at the scene unfolding just beyond their fences. The smiling contractor, the precinct captain, the neighborhood clown, now accused of burying corpses under his own home. Reporters swarmed the block. Television cameras captured the chaos as officers carried evidence bags and marked off the crime scene. Inside, the grim work continued. The crawl space was tight and suffocating, only about 2 feet high in some areas. Officers had to crawl on their hands and knees through dirt, debris, and human remains. The further they dug, the more they found. Body after body emerged from the soil. Some were intact skeletons, others were partially decomposed. Many were found with ropes still around their necks, mute testimony to how they had died. Each discovery added another name to the growing list of victims. Meanwhile, John Wayne Gacy was finally breaking down. After his drunken confession to his lawyers, he was taken into custody. In hours of interrogation, he began to speak, not with remorse, but with chilling calmness. He admitted to killing boys, dozens of them, but insisted many were runaways who had come to him voluntarily. He portrayed himself as both predator and victim of circumstance.
It was time for John Wayne Gacy to face justice.
Throughout the trial, Gacy sat calmly, sometimes smirking, sometimes doodling on notepads. He seemed detached, as though the proceedings were about someone else. He joked with guards, whispered with his lawyers, and occasionally leaned back to scan the crowd. To the families of his victims, his demeanor was infuriating. They saw no remorse, no recognition of the devastation he had caused, only arrogance. On March 12, 1980, after less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on 33 counts of murder. It was the largest number of murder convictions ever secured against a single individual in U.S. history at that time. The sentence was swift and decisive: death. John Wayne Gacy was to be executed by lethal injection.